How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. Nice to see your face.
Yeah, you too. I noticed that you hadn't really been interviewed like this before.
I have done all kinds of interviews, all kinds of different ways. Um, but you don't do any interviews any other way other than this anymore
Right.
because everybody's stuck in their house all the time now.
hmm So I just wanted to start from the beginning with your career and how you got into the industry and everything.
Okay. Well, I started in as an actor. I started when I was really little. I started acting when I was, I think, about five,
Mm.
and my mom and dad were like, I think, genuinely conflicted because they don't come from the entertainment industry. My dad was a teacher, and my mom is a painter. So I think I'm the oldest of four boys. So I think that we all had different interests. So they wanted to just support us each in what
Right.
we wanted to do, and that's what I wanted to do for whatever reason. I kind of knew that I liked that when I was little, and I did an opera. It was my very first job as a 5-year-old, and I didn't sing. I didn't have any lines, but I was like chased around a stage by this um, incredible Italian soprano named Maria Pellegrini for like 2.5 hours every night. And something in my 5-year-old brain was like, yeah, this is what I want to do for a career.
Yeah.
uh, but that was my very first job at the that was at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre in Vancouver, Canada, which is this beautiful old um, theater there. And then I started to do 1 or 2 commercials, and then I did a movie. My very first movie was an Emmy winner, um, and it was called Love Is Never Silent, and I was about 8 years old. It was about uh, like a daughter of deaf parents,
hmm
uh, which I understood because my grandparents are deaf. My mom's parents were both born deaf. Um, so yeah, I guess you sort of like fall into in acting, at least, you get a little bit lucky here and there, and things kind of suit you well. So I got a lot of luck just starting out there.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty interesting that your first on-camera role was, working on a project like that with people like Cloris Leachman and Sid Caesar and just yeah,
And we just lost Cloris
right. Yeah.
just recently, which is sad. I didn't know her well because I was 8 and she was not 8. Um, uh, but from what I remember, she was wonderful, and Mayor Winningham, who is a wonderful person, and yeah, Sid Caesar is like a blast from the past. My parents knew who Sid Caesar was. I didn't know who Sid Caesar was, and
Right.
around the same time, I think within like a couple of years of that, I actually got cast and then fired from a movie with Katharine Hepburn,
Oh, wow.
who I also didn't know who that was, right? I was like, I don't know. She's really old. Doesn't she sounds kind of funny? But like, I don't know. She seems cool. I'm only 11 or whatever. My parents' jaws are like on the floor. Um, but yeah, it's a harsh business too, man. And I got a taste of that even when I was, little. That I think it was the writer who decided that I was too tall for the
Oh,
role.
huh.
So it could be anything, but it's a roller coaster kind of career that way.
Right. And then the next on camera thing, the Mark Harmon movie, After the Promise.
Hmm. Yeah, that was cool. Mark, I remember being wonderful. And yeah, that was a story about, it was like, I think it took place like in the 50s, maybe the 40s or 50s. And he plays a guy whose wife dies. And I guess at that time where he was in the US, um, the social services or whatever, decided if they thought you were fit to be able to raise your family. He had four boys, which was, again, kind of like my family, you
hmm
know, just weird kind of parallels where you end up being able to relate to a role in a funny way, just kind of random circumstances. But what was unlike my family is the state comes and takes his 4 kids
Yep.
away from him, and then he doesn't see them for. So I played the youngest son in the oldest age when he's like 10 or 12, and his dad goes to pick him up, and he's been from foster home to foster home to foster home. And there's still actually some pretty funny pictures that you can find out there of me when I was like, I don't know, whatever, like 12 years old. And they dyed my hair brown, which I remember thinking was a really big deal as a 12-year-old, you know, like, I don't know, maybe 12-year-olds dye their hair a lot, but I didn't. So it was funny because I had like, you know, platinum blonde, like little kid blonde hair.
Yeah.
And then they dyed it brown. And I remember thinking I remember being very impressed that I was having my hair dyed for a movie, you know?
Mhm. And at that time with the early on camera stuff, were you and your family just going back and forth from Canada to Los Angeles?
No, this was all in Canada.
Oh, okay.
So Vancouver has, again, another sort of privilege that I was afforded that I didn't, you know, really earn or particularly think about when I was little. I was born and raised in Vancouver, and around the time that I was growing up, the whole like film and television industry in Vancouver was growing up. And so I just happened to grow up in this city where there was this growing, vibrant film and TV community. And so I was very lucky. I got to work where I lived, and my family didn't have to pick up like so many other young actors. Their family didn't have to pick up and move all the way to California, like the Beverly Hillbillies or whatever, you know, like with all your possessions, like tied in a handkerchief, you know, with a stick over your shoulder, like walking down the railroad tracks.
Right.
We didn't have to do that. It was here. So I worked for many years here in a whole bunch of different stuff. And I was given the opportunity to do theater and film and television, and a whole bunch of voiceover. I'm sure you're interested in some of that. Most of that was in Vancouver too.
Yeah.
It hasn't been until I was more like an adult that I got to work in the US.
Mm-hmm. And since you got to step into doing voiceover, big roles at an early age, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, probably the biggest, like most well-known, and still that I get the most fan mail for, was Gundam Wing.
Yeah.
And that was an anime project, which I honestly didn't know a lot about anime up to that point. It's funny as an actor because like sometimes you end up working in projects that like some of us are like comic book nerds, and you know, and some of us are not. So now that like comic books are cool, right? When I was a kid, comic books were like super not cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Dungeons and Dragons. Now it's like cool to be a nerd. I wish I was born like 10 years ago, because when I was a kid, like being a nerd was not cool. And I've always been a nerd,
Right.
a huge nerd, right? But I didn't really, so if you grew up, you know, like reading, you know, understanding, knowing like the whole mythology of like the Avengers, for example, now you get to be in the Avengers, and it's cool because you know the whole backstory. I didn't know the whole backstory of anime, honestly. I didn't know. I didn't actually really get it until I went to. I took a short trip to Japan. This was like 10 years after we recorded Gundam Wing, and even then I was like, oh my god, because there's Gundam Wing everywhere. It's like Star Wars.
Yep.
Over there, you know, it was everywhere, and I was like, "What? That's me. That's my guy. That's my character." But it was a cool role because you also don't always get to do in voiceover. A lot of times, cartoon and animation are really kind of over the top. You know, they're meant to be very broad and very funny,
Mm-hmm.
and anime wasn't like that. So it suited me better that way. Or suited me well that way, because you know you can go in and to the best of your ability within the world of like, you know, space pilots,
Right.
make it real, you know, give it a real performance. But man, it's again one of those things you luck into because it was like a franchise and a brand that predated me by decades.
Yeah.
You know, and I got to sort of slot into this great character that like I say, I still get you know, I still get people reaching out like, say this line or say that line or,
Hmm.
yeah, it's very funny.
Yeah, it actually Gundam Wing actually aired down here when, around the time when I was younger on Cartoon Network, and
Mhm.
yeah, I started noticing people's voices more in anime as I got older, and I noticed that like a lot of people that were also some of the main characters on that show, like Scott McNeil and Brian Drummond and Brad Swaley, just yeah, just a lot of I think there's a lot of amazing voice actors in that area, and it's a shame that anime doesn't really get dubbed up there anymore.
Yeah, the Ocean Group, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Ocean did a ton of stuff here for a long time, and then you know, and then I worked in the States a bunch, so I think I wasn't quite as like connected to what they were doing up here, but in anime anymore. But yeah, there was a bunch of years where some, you know, some huge shows came, and it was, you know, little did everybody know that they were being invaded by a bunch of Canadians.
Right.
You know, but luckily we're pretty friendly. So, but yeah, and also speaking of losing people, we just lost Kirby Morrow
Right.
last year, which was very sad because Kirby was wonderful and did tons of roles. Oh
Hmm.
my God, like so many, not only in anime, but like in, you know, in what they call prelay
Yeah.
also, right? So much work for so many years and was such a great guy to work with. Um, but yeah, there was a time and place where, you know, a whole bunch of us and all the people you mentioned and David Kay and
Yep.
Ian Corlett and there was so many, Gary Chalk, you know, a lot of these guys, people kind of ushered me in as a young man, you know, into this world. And uh, it was a lot of fun.
And with the role as hero, were you told just to match the Japanese? Because I think you sound pretty similar to what they were doing.
You know, we at times we would go back and listen to get a sense of tone or timing. But in general, honestly, we kind of did our own thing, except that the animation obviously was done already.
Yep.
So it needs to fit the animation, at least in terms of like, you know, the mouth, what they call mouth flaps, you know.
Mhm.
There's actually some very funny stories from some, I think Ian Corlett was like one of the, like had one of the famous like times where he fit like 9 words or something into like 2 mouth flaps, you know,
Yeah.
like the character only opened his mouth twice and he made it work, you know, they got this enormous long line into, there was a lot of, you know, finagling and trying to, you know, make it fit. But on the whole, no, it was like I was given a lot of artistic license to kind of create that fresh. Um, and when we needed to go back and see how they had done it originally, you know, we did that a lot. But it's, you know, it's not just like, I mean, there's a whole lore, you know, there's a whole mythology
Yep.
behind those characters and that series and the things that happen. Um, so it's a world. So
Hmm.
you enter someone else's world that they've created, you know, and then you try to um, honor their artistic choices. Um, and I felt like once I got there and I could kind of get in the sort of the ethos of what they were doing with that show, then it was like, okay, let me just run with the character,
Hmm.
and that's more or less how we did it.
Was it any more different in the process of dubbing Fatal Fury for you?
Nope, similar. I had done honestly, I'd done mostly prelay up to that point, so it
Yep.
was fun. It's funny because when you're doing prelay and you're recording the voices first, and then they're animating to your voice. At least like pre-pandemic days, we'd all get in the room together, right? And you could play off of each other, and you know,
Hmm.
listen and respond and make your choices based on what everyone was doing live in the room. Anime, not so much like that because you mostly it was just you in the room by yourself. You
Right.
know, you were getting your lines, and if you got lucky and the other actor had come in before you, you could hear their performance. But if you were the first one in, then you were kind of setting the whole tone of the scene, and they would have to play off whatever it was you gave. Totally different process, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know about how everybody else experienced it, but for me, maybe I'm just an introvert, but just like being in the room by myself with the director and just being able to just get into that world. I guess it's a little bit like music, actually. I hadn't really ever thought of that before, but I've been a musician since I was very little, and music is always, not always, but a lot of times is like that. You know, you're just in there on your own. Yeah, there's something about like you know, you put the headphones on and you get into this like little sort of sound world and it's like your own little universe. And so I really like that. I liked working that way.
Yeah.
I found that a lot of fun. It can be it can be a slog after like the third or fourth or fifth hour,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but you just get into your own little world, you know, and I kind of liked working that way.
This is just a kind of a random question, but did you know Miriam Sirwa very well? You know who that is?
No, no, not so well.
Okay. Did you know Matt Hill?
Oh, sorry, I think you
Oh,
cut out.
or did you know Matt Hill very well? I just
I did. I did. I've known, yeah, I've known Matt for a long time because you know, we started both when we were pretty young.
yeah.
So I knew Matt from before. You're talking about Gundam people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of them I knew more or less. Brad Swale and I had done a TV show. We were on the same TV show for a while.
Mm-hmm.
This like children's fantasy series called The Odyssey, which was like hired like literally every child actor in Canada, but it was like a CBC show, so it didn't play so much outside of Canada. But there was a bunch of us who were on that. Ryan Reynolds and all kinds of actors, great actors from Vancouver. So I'd met some of them there. Matt Hill and I had done some voiceover together already. Scott McNeil and I had done a bunch of voiceover already. Kirby I knew, but I got to know them better when we started going on like convention circuits, right?
Yeah.
I remember there was one where they got all the 5 Gundam pilots all together on stage. And to my recollection, we pretty much just like relentlessly made fun of each other for like an hour in that panel.
Mm-hmm.
But that's fun because Canadians are good at that. You know, it's usually pretty lighthearted and for fun.
Mm-hmm. Another one of your main anime roles that I hadn't seen mentioned really. Do you remember much about being on Please Save My Earth?
Now you're going back a ways. It's been a minute. I do remember it. Yeah, it was similar. It's a similar. I just remember having a similar kind of feeling experience of what I was describing with Gundam, because it's so different than I had done a lot of other North American like prelay animation,
Mm-hmm.
and these were sort of my first forays into dubbing. And I just remember having you know, this similar sort of experience of like, this is someone else's world that I'm stepping into, you know, and just the difference in the cultural differences, the differences in references, the difference in sense of humor.
Right.
Right, the whole tone of it is different than like, you know, like if you watch like Gundam Wing and then you watch like, I don't know, Animaniacs,
Yeah.
you know, or whatever, like the typical North American. Maurice LaMarche, by the way, is an old friend of mine. He was
Oh, yeah.
actually my very first cartoon
That's cool.
with Mo, and we're still friends. But totally different worlds, you know, totally different sides of the planet, and
Mm-hmm.
completely different ways of looking at not only life, but like looking at animation and cartoons and how to do them and what they yeah, it was cool just to get a whole different perspective on how cartoons can be made.
Mm-hmm. Right. I thought it was interesting too that you and then Jason Gray Stanford also started out doing anime, and now he's, you know, like a big on-camera person too.
Yeah, some of us kind of cross over or do both, and some of us not so much. You know, hey, look. The reality for actors is like if you're working at all, certainly if you're making a living, but even if you're working at all, the vast majority of actors don't make a living acting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very difficult career that way, you know, because it's most of us, you know, kind of have a side hustle,
Yep.
you know, or something that we do right to pay the bills. And some of us get very lucky and really get to work in voiceover and just be voiceover performers and like really get completely immersed in that world and hopefully make a living, you know. And then there's others of us like Jason and others who have gotten lucky and get to do a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've done probably about half my resume is voiceover and about half is film and TV and theater, you know.
Right.
I love that, man. Like I remember as a kid just feeling like the cool thing about acting. I remember when I was, I don't know, very young, kind of going like, oh, you could like I remember thinking like, you know how like when you're like really young in school, they're already talking to you about like, okay, so you need to think about what you're gonna do with your career. You know, there's like a counseling department, right? And like you're like, I don't know, what are you like 13 or something? And they're like, now you need to make the decision of what you're gonna do for the rest of your life, you know, and you're like, I don't even know, like, I don't even know who I am yet. Like, back off, you know? But I remember thinking when I was really young, like, man, like, there's so many things that I wanted to try.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, I was like, oh, but in acting, like, I can try all of these things.
Right.
Never really gonna know what it's like to be like a firefighter, you know? But I can at least try it on and like go there. And I always felt like the best actors, you know, really went there, not just in like, you know, putting on the fireman hat and like, you know, going up and down the fire pole or whatever, but trying to relate deeply with the emotional experience of what a person who's a firefighter goes through,
Yeah.
emotionally, intellectually, you know, like really like the important stuff. And when I was little, I remember thinking like, oh, I could do that. I could like kind of get this. I could have this life where I could experience what it's like to be all these different kinds of people. And I found that really attractive. And so, yeah, Jason and some few others of us have been afforded the privilege of being able to do that in a bunch of different mediums.
Mm-hmm.
And man, it's like, it's to me, like, that's the coolest part about life is learning about yourself through other people,
Yeah.
you know, like really trying to like relate with like what it's like for someone who's totally different than you. And it tells you all this stuff about yourself that you might not have known.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So going back to on camera stuff too, there was another dark TV movie from the early 90s that called Relentless.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was originally called Mood Indigo.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that's what I remember being on. And then, yeah, then they changed it to Relentless Mind of a Killer, which is very dramatic. But super cool project for me because it was like one of my first, you know, like real roles that I could kind of dig into.
Mm.
You know, like had a character arc and was completely unlike me. So yeah, so that was cool. Ended up being kind of a cool movie.
Do you kind of have a tendency? Do you enjoy playing darker roles more?
It's funny because when I was a little bit younger, I tended to get cast as villains a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly why, but for whatever reason. And yes, but it depends. I have a caveat. Like the role that interests me the most, honestly, is like is basically a Hamlet archetype, which is essentially a regular person who is in a very difficult ethical moral dilemma, and trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. To me, that's what drives me the most, and that's what interests me the most. It's just like that kind of gets me in my gut. Characters like that, which are often good guys. I do like playing bad guys, but I like playing bad guys when it's good writing.
Right.
When it's bad writing, and right, and you're like, well, this is what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do this, and you know, like I don't know, like so many Bond villains or whatever. It can be fun, but when it's like Richard III or Macbeth,
Mm.
you know, or so many other great villains, you know, created by great creative minds, of which there are many. It's especially fun because they have, because like, yeah, if you're not a good person, you have like more degrees of freedom in your behavior. Because if
Mm.
you're a good person, there's a whole bunch of things that you're not going to do to people, right? But
Mm.
if you're not such a good person, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So playing that can be a lot of fun because you know you got this like broad palette of colors to paint with as an actor. But yeah, it's not just any bad guy. It's certain ones that are really a lot of fun.
Mm. And what was your role in the 1996 that Eric Roberts movie, Past Perfect?
Yeah, so that was yes, I don't know, not really a bad guy, but not a great kid, but like a troubled kid. Um, yeah, that was a crazy movie. That was like a big like action movie. Again, shot in Vancouver. I worked on that. I worked with Nick Mancuso on that as well,
Oh yeah, yeah.
who I then worked with later again on a we made a series based on Jack London's book Call of the Wild.
Yep. Great.
Um, uh, yeah, that was a crazy experience. I remember I learned a lot on that movie. I learned a whole lot because again, I got, you know, I'm like 16 years old and I get to play like a character that actually has a, you know, is like has a storyline in the film. And you know, it's so dated. It's funny to watch it now because it's like, wow,
Hmm.
that was special effects in 1996.
Yeah.
But still a cool experience for a youngster.
And moving ahead a few years, what was your experience working on They with Wes Craven?
Yeah, that was another dark movie. There was a lot of dark movies back then. Um, yeah, that was cool. I remember I didn't, you know, I wasn't in a whole lot. You know what I mean? So it was kind of a quick in and out. Just to you know jump in and play those few scenes and then we were sort of done with it. But yeah, kind of a cool movie, horror movie.
Yep.
You know, so that was different again. You know, just like getting to do different genres and different get a little bit of experience with how different people make you know different styles of movie. Yeah, you're you're making me feel all nostalgic for all my all the luck I had when I was little to get to do so many different types of things.
And when did you move to LA?
I started well, I'd been sort of going back and forth honestly between Canada and LA since I was, you know, like I don't know, pretty young, you know, 18 or something like that. Um, I didn't start spending more time there until, I don't know, maybe like 2010. I
Okay.
was still in, like up in Canada and, you know, going back and forth a bit.
And are you there now still?
I'm actually, well, I'm sort of honestly, like I'm kind of between places like I always am.
Okay.
But, you know, my family's still in Canada.
Right.
So, but it's a weird thing when you're, we all, you know, we all meaning like when I was younger, you know, those of us who were, you know, all those people we were just talking about,
Yep.
we all, we all got to, you know, work where we live, which is an incredible privilege, that actors in Vancouver have, because there's so much that shoots here. But that's not how it is for most actors. Most of the time, in most places, you know, you don't happen to live necessarily in like a hub city where they film a lot of stuff, outside of, you know, some few places, LA, New York, London,
Yep.
whatever else, right? Toronto, maybe, some few others. So, so for the last, you know, for a lot of my life, like I've been moving around a lot. You know, I'll like move from place to place, and you get used to like packing up all your stuff, and now we move over here because that's where you got to go for work, and then the next year, who knows? It's fun. It has its drawbacks, you know. It's kind of nice to be able to pick a place and just stay there. But who knows? It's hard to say, you know, what's how it's all going to work out. You know, post COVID, it kind of feels like, you know, all the rules have been sort of thrown up in the air, and we're going to have to kind of wait and see where everything lands, you know?
Yep. And so back in terms of voiceover, since you've been consistently working in voiceover projects since you were a kid, did you start approaching them differently at a certain time, like at a certain age?
Approaching them differently, like in terms of the work?
Yeah, like the role and getting into it and everything.
I don't know. I don't know that I did, honestly. I mean, you grow as a person and you grow as an actor. So I don't know if I've ever really approached any role the same way twice. I guess maybe that comes from music, because I taught myself to play when I was very little, and I never learned how to read music. I probably should have, but it just didn't interest me. I just was more interested in just playing, and so I never play any song the same way twice, really. And I think I more or less approach acting kind of the same way. Usually it works out better because, you know, if you're working in the theater, which is really more the actor's medium, it needs to be fresh every night. You can't play it. You can't have like a great night and then the next night, you know, go like, oh, I'm gonna do it exactly the same way and it's gonna work out just the same as it did. It never works out that way. You have to approach every night like it's new, and let the chips fall where they may, to some degree. And then in film and TV, you're doing the same take like over and over and over sometimes. You know, so if you don't keep that fresh, that's not to say like, you know, I'm standing still in one take and I'm doing backflips in the next one. You know, you need to have some continuity. But it's not as much fun if you try to do it the same way every time. And also, you can't really do it the same way every time, I don't think. So that was always more or less my approach. And for voiceover and for animation, it was kind of like that. Anyway, like I said, theater is the actor's medium because it's the actors who are the ones who are ultimately responsible for telling the story. In film and television and in animation, somebody else takes your performance and then kind of edits it, right? They make a composite, which then becomes the film. So I don't know. I guess I always sort of imagined that like if I was an anime editor or an animation editor or a director, like, you know, going back to the edit room and like hearing an actor do the same line exactly the same way, like 10 times in a row, it'd drive me crazy, you know?
Yep.
Well, I always tried to offer them something different, you know what I mean? Like, I can make it work like this. And then if you want another take, let me give you something else, you know? Cause they never know what they might need for sure once they go and try to put it all together, you know?
And what about since you've been in a lot of video games too, is your approach to that any much different, or is that kind of the same thing?
Yeah, no, video games, whole different world. Yeah, that's so funny because I played video games when I was a kid, right? I didn't have a console for a long time, but I always played. I used to play, you know, like Nintendo, stuff like that. Zelda, love Zelda.
Yep.
But yeah, when I started, that's a different thing because it's not linear, right? It's not like, you know, once upon a time there was a da-da-da, and then there's a whole story, and then a half hour later or whatever it is, like the story ends, you know, and you just do your lines in order. In video games, like I did I guess there's a pretty well-known character in a couple of games called DJ Atomica.
Oh yeah,
who
yeah,
was in like SSX. There was some snowboarding stuff, and but mainly it was from Burnout and Burnout Paradise.
yep.
These racing games. So yeah, that was like a whole different world because it's not like, DJ Atomica has one line that, once upon a time there was a racetrack where everybody, and then, it goes through the story and then it ends. Like you can drive anywhere. So they need to have, it's all these lines like preloaded depending on how the player interacts with the game. No, man, that like, even the script doesn't look the same. It's just like tick, 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 tick,
Oh,
tick, tick, all these lines, right? Here's all the lines that, DJ Atomica might say if you take this jump. And then here's all the lines that he might say if you take that jump, or if you go through this tunnel, or if you. So it's like, it was a little bit more like theater in the sense that you are essentially like in video games, you're bringing to life all of these different lines that you never really know when they might actually be said.
hmm.
And then trying to build some like continuity of that personality or that character over the course of that was like totally different.
Right.
There was no beginning, middle, and end, so we just you kind of had to just bring every line to life with its own little package.
Yep.
Luckily that one worked out pretty well. I know there's a lot of people who really love DJ Atomica, and then there's like some very small group of people who want him to die very, very badly. For whatever reason, they're like, I'm sick of hearing DJ Atomica.
Right.
And I can relate to both because I actually had a lot of fun making it. And then like by the end of like 4 hours of saying like essentially the same line over and over again, you're kind of like, okay, that's enough DJ Atomica for now.
Yeah. I do want to touch on your music too, because I actually, when we started talking, I actually went through and listened to some of it. I really like the songs "Magic Spell" and "Ready to Fall."
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. What's your process for coming up with songwriting and all that?
Well, like I said, I started playing piano when I was little. When I was about 8, we had a piano in the house, and I think my mom like got me like 6 months of piano lessons, which I hated, but also like had already shown some interest, so had kind of figured out more or less how I could. I remember there was some Beethoven that I learned when I was 8 or 9 or 10. So I sort of had a natural ear, and then this poor teacher would come in and like, be like, here's the piece, we're going to learn. I'll play it for you so you can hear it. And then, we can go in, and then, right. And then they would come back the next week and I would more or less play it. And they were like, wow, this is great. This is going so well. But I wasn't reading the music. I was just playing it by ear, which I think made it very, very challenging for them. And I just wasn't into the lessons, but I just started to play because there was the piano and I liked it. When I was probably like 16, I got super into Elton John.
Oh, okay.
Elton John and Stevie Wonder are my biggest musical influences by far.
Yep.
But as like a 16-year-old, like nobody was playing Elton John who was 16. Okay. Like I was the one, like everybody else was like, like blasting like Nirvana.
Yep.
And I'm blasting like Elton John, Sacrifice, 1989, But I just loved his sensibility and I loved his songwriting, and my dad used to play these records when I was really little in our house. So I had this like whole emotional connection to them, And then when I was about 19 or 20, I kind of really discovered Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life, like changed everything. But to answer your question, the way that I don't know how Stevie has he's on a whole other level. He's like, this guy's like a musical genius. It's unbelievable. And if you listen to those records, I don't know if you know this, but he plays most of the instruments also. Yeah. Like it's insane, this guy. But the way I originally like kind of learned how to write music was based off of Elton John's process, which
Okay.
he had somebody else who wrote the words first, which was different than me. I wrote my own lyrics. But he always said like he would kind of walk around with like a lyric, and he would kind of, whatever he would do, it was sort of like gestate this like, you know, concept or this idea or this feeling, whatever. And then when he felt like he needed to go and sit down at the piano, he'd sit at the piano and he'd like finish the song in like 30 minutes.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like, that was just how I was exposed to songwriting. I was like, okay, well, I guess that's normal. So that became normal for me. And it's very much like that. I'll get like something that like, I'll get like a little bee in my bonnet, like something that kind of irks me or whatever, or it'll be something that inspires me, or it'll be something that I'm sad about, but I'll just have like some feeling about something, and then I'll kind of just walk around with it until it's like, this needs to come out. And sometimes I need to like drop everything and like rush to a piano.
Hmm.
Um, and then it all usually comes out like very quickly in less than an hour or so. And I don't do a lot of editing, honestly. Like sometimes I do, and I'll process through a song and like change it. And, you know, and there's to some degree, a little bit of that, but I kind of like what John Lennon used to say in his later years. He used to say like, you know, songs should be like newspaper articles, you know, like they should come out, you should read them, and then they're gone.
Hmm.
You know, they're not these like, at least pop songs, you know, I'm not talking about like Mozart or whatever. Maybe you need you should take some time if you're trying to write like Mozart.
Hmm.
But the way that I write like a pop music, you know, you got 3 or 4 or 5 minute song. Once it's ready to go, it comes out. And then I got to make a couple of records with some wonderful people.
Yeah.
And Magic Spell and Ready to Fall were on the first one. And then I got to make another a few years later, and I'm working on another. But honestly, man, like music has probably like you know, actually like saved my life,
Right.
because it's like, it's just been the thing that I can just do. And I feel like if everybody had something like this, it might not be music, but if everybody could find, right, like a thing where it's just like, you just got to get the crazy out, you know, you just got to get the like, whatever it is, you know, like just your emotions have like a life and a flow, and they are in and they need to come out, you know. And you know, some people like scream into a pillow, you know, and some people like, I don't know, like go for a run or whatever it is. You got to find your thing, and for me that was music, and it's just somewhere where I could just get it out. And man, I'm like, I feel so lucky that I had that, especially when I was young.
Hmm. After I saw your more recent YouTube uploads of different covers that you were doing, I really wasn't expecting because the first one I watched was I Want to Know What Love Is, and I wasn't expecting the amazing falsetto that you can do.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, with someone who has a voice as deep as yours, I bet that would impress you. Uh, yeah, I think I'm actually a baritone, but I don't know. I had that when I was a kid, and I always sort of held on to it. And I don't sing that way all the time, but
Mhm.
yeah, there's something, and there's some kind of, I'm sure somebody has studied this, but there's some kind of like emotional resonance, you know, to like different pitches of the human voice, whatever it is. And I always just loved that song, you know, but
Yeah.
I didn't like, I don't love it so much, honestly, when people like, when you do a cover and you play it exactly the same as the original artist,
Yeah.
you know, I usually feel like they already did that well, you know, like leave that,
Mhm.
you know, if you have a thing, you want to reinterpret it or adapt it or whatever. And I love that. And then yeah, but then there's always people who are like, you know, like I said, just like with DJ Atomica, you know, like that vast majority of people are like, I love that. That's wonderful. But there's always someone who's like, I like the original better. It's like, okay, it's still there. It still exists. You can go listen to that.
It seems like you would be really good at singing songs by people like Paul Young and George Michael and stuff like that, just based off of
Yeah.
what I've heard. Yeah.
I started this. I started a YouTube. I kind of readapted my YouTube channel. I renamed it The Heartstring,
Mhm.
and it's meant to be like just a string of good songs played by good people, because that's what I care about in music.
Right.
And I'm going to just, I'm going to take, a few years ago, I was kind of just sitting around thinking about, a friend of mine actually said to me, what have you been doing with music? And I was like, it hasn't, I haven't been super active in music just in the last couple of years. And he was like, there's a lot of people like out in the world, like, saying a lot of stuff, about a lot of things. And there's a lot of negativity, and there's a lot of like, not good, there's a lot of like voices out there, just like, just spreading not very good right now. And I was like, couldn't agree more, completely agree. It's like an epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, so what's your excuse? I was like, oh, point taken, so I just started, so that's when I started to, I was like, okay, well, I don't know if like a YouTube channel is going to change the world or nothing, but it's a little bit of something, it's a little bit of good, a little bit of positive. And I don't really believe in the like, kumbaya type of positive, like, let's all just pretend like everything's fine. But man, there's so many great, it just dawned on me, like there's so many great musicians who have written so many great songs that I happen to know.
Mm-hmm.
So why not just put more of that out there? It's not the answer, but it's part of it.
Right. Mm-hmm. So going back to acting stuff, how did you land the well, I guess, yeah, it was kind of a bigger role on the V series.
Yeah. V was V was a show on ABC that was all about aliens. It was a remake, yeah, it was a show in the 80s.
Yep.
Which is also very funny to go back and watch, by the way, if you ever want to see some really outdated sci-fi. Although our version of V is also pretty outdated at this point, which is funny. But it was it was all about like an alien invasion.
Yep.
And all again, like a bunch of great actors, some of whom I'm still in touch with. And I was actually only written in for like, it was like when I first auditioned for it, it was only supposed to be like an episode or two, to kill off this one character, played by Alan Tudyk. And then through some series of sort of fortunate events, my character got developed into this sort of mole that was an alien who was a sort of a mole for the humans, who was like an alien who had like empathy.
Yeah. Right.
And cared for the human race or cared for other races, and back to my earlier point about like a character with a deep, a good guy with a deep ethical moral struggle. This was like right in the wheelhouse for me. This was kind of one of the ways I discovered that that's the type of role that really moves me. Is like, here's a guy who now, in truth, he's not a guy, he's a lizard.
Yeah.
Apparently they're all lizards underneath, but we never saw my lizardness in the show. So I could just more or less play it like as a, I didn't have any like tail come out or nothing like that. But, here's a guy who, who's like at a high level of command in this like horrible alien race that wants to destroy humanity, but doesn't agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's stuck between like, if anybody found out, he's literally like dead. He's dead. But he's working with the humans, and it became this like this. To me, it was actually a really cool, compelling storyline because of that. Crazy show to work on though, because like it was all. If you go back and watch it, like most of what I worked in what they call a practical set, which is just like a normal set, like when you think of like a movie set,
Mm-hmm.
like if it's in like a kitchen. We go to like somebody's house and we rent their house and we shoot in their kitchen. That's a practical set. Ours was all green screen. So everything we shot on V was in this, it looked like a giant bathtub. You go into this huge studio. Yeah. And it was like sort of had rounded edges right at the bottom, like a bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
Such a trip to shoot on, man, because it was all CG. So it was like, it'd be like me and like Marina Baccarin and like Laura Vandervoort and like a table.
Yep.
And that's it. And everything else is put in after, and I'd never worked like that before. So that was a trip to. They had this machine. They had a monitor like a TV screen where you could actually go back behind the camera, and it was generating the whole world live on the screen. So I could see like Marina and Laura like walking around in the spaceship
Right.
on the screen. So the director could use that, you know, to like. But we didn't. When we were out there, you're just like, I'm in another big green room today.
Mhm.
It was weird.
It was around that same time too. Was is the resurrection, is that the probably most like one of your have like most difficult role to, you think?
Resurrection was fantastic. In the first season of Resurrection, Resurrection was like a, you know, at the time when it first came out, it was like a pretty big, you know, ABC Sunday night primetime drama.
Yep. Right.
And in the first season on Resurrection, you know, we got to work with. There was this wonderful showrunner named Dan Adius, and Dan assembled Dan and the Resurrection team assembled this group of writers, directors, and producers who all work on cable. You know, they had all come from like House of Cards and Damages and The Tudors and all of these wonderful shows. So honestly, like I was kind of pinching myself in the first season going like, a lot of actors feel this way, like secretly. They don't tell you, but they're sort of like, I'm just kind of a normal person, you know? Like I'm not this, you know, thing that they sell us as, you know? I'm just kind of like everybody else, more or less. And I was sort of having that experience, like, how did I end up with these incredible people? Because they were just such amazing artists. So yeah, a difficult role for sure, but so rewarding because you know the subject matter of you know this little boy comes back to life after 32 years,
Yeah.
followed by a series of others who come back also. You know, it's sci-fi and it could be handled very poorly. You know what I mean? It'd be so easy to like you know make that into just a melodrama or whatever. And I just felt like in the first season it was just handled so. The way that it wasn't just about like, oh my God, they're coming back to life. It was the writing really got into like, what does this mean?
Yep.
You know, like if this were to happen, it's not just that it happened. It's like, what does it mean that it happens? And what does it mean for the people who are, so for my character, here's a guy who's like a devout a pastor. You know, his whole sense of faith is like the bedrock of his personality, of who he is. You know, he preaches the gospel every Sunday to his congregation, and then his best friend from childhood actually comes back to life. He witnesses an actual miracle, and of course he can't believe that it's true. So again, there's this conflict of this like very normal human being conflict, you know, like what if your whole life was based on like faith in this story of this guy who came back to life, and then someone you knew actually came back to life, and you'd have to actually struggle with like, is that true? Is that not true? Can I believe this? Can I not believe this? That's wonderful, because that's really, anyone can relate to that. You just substitute, you know, whatever that particular content for you know what might be relevant in your life, and then if you were put in a situation like that where you really came up against like you know your whole sense of who you are, that's just the best stuff to play.
When you get really into a role like that, does it take you a while to pull out of it and just go back to being a normal person, like once the cameras are off and stuff?
It depends, honestly. You know, it happens more in theater that way, where I sometimes it's harder to shed a role, and it depends on the role too, because see, in theater you know you have some number of weeks of rehearsal where you're just in that character, in that role every day, and then you have some number of weeks of the run of the show where you're in that character every night, and sometimes twice a day. That's very different than film and television, where you know you have some weeks or months of preparation, but you're not like in it every single day for 8 hours a day, like a rehearsal. And then when you shoot, you know, there's, there's usually one or two or maybe three actors who are working like every single day on a series, for example. But most of the actors aren't there every single day. You're coming in a day here and then you have another day here. And so it's more in the theater where I find that can be more of a thing. I've played roles in the theater where like I dream as the character, and then I wake up and I'm like, who am I? I'm not, that's not me. I'm me. I'm me. I'm me. I'm not that, I'm being facetious, but like, yeah, it can sort of like get in your bones a little.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like I was taught when I was, for all you young actors out there, I was taught when I was young, leave your work in the rehearsal hall.
Mm-hmm.
Don't bring your work home. And it's probably true, not just for acting. It's probably like there's other jobs too, where it's like, do your work. And when your work is done, like go home. And if you're like with your spouse or whatever, they don't need to hear all that, right? It's like, to some degree, it's healthy to keep them separate.
Mm-hmm. And so most recently, what was your experience being on Chilling Adventures of Sabrina?
So great. So great, man. Kiernan is so wonderful. She was such a pro. And I remember, I remember I mentioned that to her. I was like, you must have really had a great experience, whatever, working on Mad Men or whatever else you've done. Cause like you really handle yourself really great. And I said to her, and this is true just from my other experience, the number one on the, on the call sheet, the star of the show sets the tone for everybody else, and for someone who's, so young, she just has such a great work ethic. She just set a great tone for the whole show, and the rest of the actors were wonderful too. It was, I had a lot of fun working on it. It's like wacky, world of like witches and mysteries, because they really built that world.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just had a lot of fun working on that.
And overall, with as many things as you've been in, are most situations on set have been good for you? Or is there anything that was like really bad or really scary or weird?
I was talking to my friend the other day because his daughter, who is, I don't know, 12 or 14 or something like that, she's interested in acting. And so she's been, taking some of the initial steps, into just maybe trying to get an agent or something like, those types of things. And he was asking me advice. And I said, look, I got to be honest with you. Like, I feel super protective, especially of young actors, but of just artists and like anybody who like has a heart. In general, I feel very protective of, because the world is how it is, and when I was young, I witnessed some things that like kind of probably you shouldn't really have to deal with ideally, as a young person. Like I remember like on one project, like there was like a young kid, who was supposed to be crying in the scene, and like, they're just a kid. So like they didn't, it couldn't have been more than maybe 3 years old or something. And like, so the director goes over and like, okay, roll. And they like smacked him on the hand, and the baby like starts crying.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, action. And I was young, so I didn't really get what was going on, but like you process these things as you go along, and I'm like, that's not right. Like, that's not cool. And there was, there's just the weird like marriage, I guess, of like art and commerce. Creates an industry that has like all kinds of problems.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing some of those come to light now. So I guess you got to take the good with the bad to some degree. But I feel, back to my buddy, I was like, look, man, hey, the advice my folks gave to me, which was like the best advice I think you could give to a kid who's interested in whatever it might be, acting or whatever. They were like, you know what? As long as you love doing this, go for it. and, you know, do it 100%. And if it ever stops making you happy, quit
Mhm.
and do something else. You know, there was never any, like pressure, you know, to like do something you didn't want to do or be someone that you weren't.
Mhm.
That's where I feel like most of the problems come from. You know,
Mhm.
is like, yeah, when you're not really being true to yourself, you end up making like weird decisions. And so, yeah, yeah, you know, uh, I think there's like a lot of credence in that sort of very simple advice, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so I've always tried to do that. Honestly, like the vast majority of the experiences that I've had have been wonderful because mostly you're working with artists.
Yeah.
Um, but but yeah, there's been a few things like that. So I don't usually, you know, highly recommend sending your kids into you know, the entertainment world. Um, but if, you know, if that's what they want to do and they feel really clear about it and it's not you know, because of the pressure from their parents or whatever it is, then yeah, totally, you know, go for it because you never know. Um, but just know that, you know, there's no pressure to be doing anything that you don't want to do, you know?
Mhm. Another thing I always like asking actors is, have you ever been up for any TV or movie stuff that went on to become something really iconic?
Yeah, man. I mean, I remember, gosh, well, I guess DiCaprio and I are probably about the same age. And when
Mhm.
he was, when we were both, I guess, around 17 or 18 or maybe younger even, I remember auditioning for a movie called This Boy's Life,
Yeah, I love that movie. Yeah.
right? And like, I remember, you know, even as a kid, like reading it and being like, this is going to be awesome, you
Mhm.
know, and you're like, you could be working with De Niro. You're like, oh my God, you know? um, and, and so of course I didn't know who he was. But this DiCaprio kid gets it. And, you know, I mean, of course it's not really, I don't think, you know, particularly useful to look back and go like, if only this or if only that. And I don't really, um, but, uh, man, he was so good,
Mhm.
like just ridiculously good, you know? And actually, I remember being like, okay, that's the bar, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he was still young and he was still, but then there was Gilbert Grape. Did you see that movie? What's Eating
Yeah.
Gilbert Grape?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, this guy's on a whole other level. So, uh, cool to be like, you know, it's kind of like in sports, like, you know, if you're going to get beat by a team, you want to get beat by the team that wins the championship, you know?
Mhm.
So I think I got beat by the team that won the championship. So that was cool.
And with instances like that, was it mostly when you were a teenager, like being up for roles and
Yeah,
stuff?
more or less. I mean, I don't know. To be honest with you, like for me to like, you know, sort of feel like I missed out on a role, I'd kind of have to like remember the role.
Mhm. Yeah.
And mostly I don't. Uh, I think it was just like a coping mechanism that I developed when I was young was like if something's like out on offer or, you know, like there's some interest in me for some whatever project, or what happens more commonly is you audition, you know, and you send in a tape or whatever. Um, I learned when I was young to like, I would get the opportunity. I would do whatever, you know, I needed to do, either audition or like, you know, negotiate the role or discuss with my agent, whatever it was, you know, the leading up to it. But if I like got an audition, I do the audition and it's like, as I walked out of the room, this is to my previous point, leave your work in the rehearsal hall. As I walked out of the audition room, it was gone.
Hmm.
Right. And then if like they called later and said, hey, we'd love to hire you, or, you know, we'd like to come in, see you again, or meet the director or whatever, then it was almost like a bonus, you know, it was like, oh yeah, but honestly, I'll have like, it'll be like, oh, you've got a call back for blah, blah, blah project. And I'll be like, okay, yeah, did I audition for that? What was that one? You know, cause it's like gone.
Yeah.
You just can't live your life. I mean, as a kid, it was very stressful the rejection in our business is intense.
Mhm.
You know, most people go on job interviews at some point in their life. So most people know what it's like, you know what I mean? Go on a job interview and like the pressure of like, am I going to get hired? Am I not going to get hired? All that. Actors are going on job interviews all the time.
Yep.
Like that's most of our, you know, that's most of our life. Uh, you're being seen for projects. So most of the time it's no, you know, like they didn't hire you.
Mhm.
It's like the worst case scenario, like 90% of the time, you know? So as a kid, that was very difficult. Even as an adult, it's hard to go on a job interview and for them to say no, you know? So as a kid, I just had to like come to some ways of dealing with all this. And that was one of them. I was just like, when it's gone, it's gone. And if it comes back around, then awesome. Uh, the upside of that is like, I don't deal with a lot of regret.
Mhm.
I don't write. I don't think about like all the roles that I might have had or how it all could have been, that type of thing. I think it's probably healthier to do it that way. Um, but I mean, you know, sometimes I read a script and I'm like, again, it's more often in the theater. You know, I have a Hamlet in me that is just been dying to get out for like 20 years,
Mhm.
and it just, you know, just the right opportunity hasn't come along for it. But there's some roles like that, you know, that I'm really dying to play, but I don't spend a lot of time, honestly, like, you know, thinking back on all the roles that could have been.
Mhm. And outside of Katharine Hepburn, what other like have you ever been starstruck by anybody that you were working with, even up to since you've been older?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Uh, well, again, sort of like I was saying before, like, you know, there's actors are. Uh, how do I say? There's you know, where actors are advertised. You know what I mean? So I think we're all built up by the industry that we're in, to, you know, be these you know, incredible beings or whatever it is that people think, and really actors are the same as everybody else. They're just human beings. And as I started to get older and started to kind of actually feel more like that, you know, I would get to work with some amazing people, and I always felt like, you know, more or less that, you know, it's better just to relate with people that way, you know, just that
Mhm.
they're human beings first, and then whatever their accomplishments are, you know, are like effects of them. They're not, you know, they don't make them who they are or whatever. But I'll tell you, I worked on, a few years ago, I did a limited series for Hulu called The Looming Tower, which was
Yep.
all about 9/11. Yeah, so I got to work um, a bunch with Jeff Daniels, who is incredible. He's
Mhm.
just incredible, uh, and really just an incredible guy, which human being, um, and also, you know, his work is really, really, really good,
Mhm.
and it's been really good for a really long time, right?
Right.
He's been really consistent. Um, so yeah, that was definitely a time where I was like, wow, this guy. Uh, and then luckily, it turned out that he was like a wonderful person,
Yep.
also, you know, and a musician, and but man, there's been so many. I've been lucky to. I had a great experience working with Ewan McGregor, who is an
Oh.
excellent director, and I hope he gets to direct more, because he's so good. And um, gosh, yeah, Catherine. I mean, like Catherine Hepburn is a high bar, so
Right.
uh, you know, that's a tough one. But yeah, there's been some wonderful actors that I've gotten to sort of cross paths with so far, and hopefully there'll be more. But like I say, you know, they're all human beings who struggle with human being things,
Yep.
like everybody else does, you know. So when they turn out to be good people as well as good actors, that kind of always means the most to me, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, like since I've been doing interviews, I've always kind of viewed it in that same perspective also, but there's still certain people, like if I was interviewing Michelle Pfeiffer or something, I would definitely get really anxious.
Yeah, for sure. but I'll tell you, just having had this one a little bit of time with you, it feels that way, and it's nice for us on this side of the interview. At least my experience is I feel a lot more comfortable when somebody talks to me, just as a human being, rather than as like some product they have to sell. I always felt uncomfortable, in those interviews where, they're sort of like, I don't know, it's just there's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of like, oh my, so it's you. So what have you done? And like, who are you really? Like, tell us about this and tell us about that. And it's like, it's a whole production, and it's like, just talk to me like a human being, and like, let's talk about something meaningful. And it's not always like that. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. I do. Yeah. The last things I wanted to ask, is there anything that you're working on currently?
I'm kind of between projects at the moment, but I have had the opportunity to get back in the studio and start to record again, and youtube.com/Mark Hildreth. That's where I'm going to put it all up there. And I know some amazing musicians, and so I'm really hoping that like the social distancing and the the whole pandemic thing will let us be able to get together again, at least with like plexiglass between us or something, so that we can play together again, because that's just something that if I could just be in the studio like in all my free time, I probably would be. I have a real love affair with music that way, so I've got I'm writing another album. It's sort of in process, and also I'm developing some projects as a writer producer for maybe television, or maybe just streaming, or maybe not sure exactly, but I have a scripted comedy series that I'm working on with somebody, and I have a couple of feature film scripts that I've been developing for a few years. So you never know. Maybe I'll get to tell some of my own stories, as well as be part of other people's.
Right. And have you ever? I like to end every interview I do with asking, have you ever thought about what you want your legacy to be in terms of your career so far?
I studied at the National Theatre School, which is a conservatory theater program in Canada, in Montreal, right? And it's more or less like Canada's answer to like Juilliard. They take 12 actors a year. You work with some of the best people in this country and from other countries as well. And it was really a wonderful program. And when I went there when I was 18, I had already done a lot of work, and for the first time, I was like talking about like performing and acting, and talking about that whole world with people for whom expression and acting, and specifically the theater, but more broadly just acting in general, was a very important and meaningful pursuit. In other words, it wasn't just all about like, getting accolades and making money and getting famous or whatever, that there was more to it than that. And that's when I was like exposed to the history of theater, which goes back for many thousands of years, actually. And the purpose of which was always to explore like the fundamental question of like, how do we live together best as a society? Like, how do people relate to each other? And like, yeah, actually like live more or less like in peace. Like, how do we solve these, they would like tackle these like really important moral issues that like human beings struggle with, So it was sort of, I realized for the first time that I and all actors are actually part of a very long legacy that has profound philosophical importance. So to me, like, that's what it's all about. There's other things too, like there's nice sort of I don't know, side benefits of being an actor. Like maybe you can make a little money, and
Hmm.
maybe you can, you know, have some nice dinners, or maybe get a nice car, I guess, or uh, you know, whatever all the rest of those things are. But um, I'm giving this backstory because, like, the short answer is, uh, I want to have left the world a better place than I found it.
Hmm.
And there's something that means specifically to me. It's not just sort of a general broad kind of like Pollyanna, like, I hope everybody's happy or whatever.
Yeah.
But ideally, I'd like to be part of projects and work with the type of people and the type of scripts, and create work that um, challenges people to ask the most important questions in life. Um, and and to me, that's kind of what the point of art has always been, and that's what I learned from some of these people. I went to this wonderful institution. This is part of what I learned from them. Is you get that's part of the privilege of being an artist, whatever your art form is.
Hmm.
Um, and I would define art as in a very broad way, but it's like you're asking the right questions. You're not meant to like be telling people what to do or how to think or how to live.
Hmm.
The greatest movie you ever saw probably made you think about yourself and about life in a
Right.
way you never thought about it before, right?
Hmm.
I think for most people that's true. That's what I want to do. That's what moves me the most.
Hmm.
And I don't even really care who I am in it. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to be part of those projects.
Right. Well, thanks. This was fun for me, and I'm glad that I got to like chronicle your whole career in order and stuff.
Likewise, I appreciate it. And thanks for making some time for me, Chris. And keep me updated as you go forward. And let me know if there's anything I can ever do to help.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll be sure to send this to you once I have it up on YouTube too.
I'd love that.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, thanks, man. Okay, bye bye.